Good morning from Bear Country, California. I'm Dr. Caroline Heldman, and here are your headlines for the fourth week, the last week in August 2021. Afghanistan and our withdrawal from that country after a protracted 20-year war has dominated the headlines as it should, and a new threat has cropped up at the airport as we are evacuating folks. ISIS-K. ISIS-K is an extremist group that is vying for power with the Taliban, and so they are targeting the folks who are at the airport and evacuating as a way of gaining some political ground with the Taliban. So we need to get out of there as soon as possible. Biden says the longer we stay there, the greater the potential for an attack on Americans and other folks who are trying to evacuate. So far, we've evacuated 97,500 people, and about 1,500 Americans are still in Afghanistan as of right now. We do anticipate they will get out of the country in the next couple of days. The Taliban, of course, blocked entry to the airport for Afghans, and women have already been told to stay in their homes and to work from home because they can't trust the Taliban fighters, the Taliban soldiers. It's a chilling reminder of the last time that the Taliban were in charge. They're saying that this is temporary. We doubt that is the case. Biden has also sent some top officials, including the head of the CIA, to negotiate not only getting out of the country, but to negotiate human rights with the Taliban. And our NATO allies are agreeing to put pressure on the Taliban, using the pressure they have through Afghan funds that are in foreign banks to compel them to maintain human rights. So looking at what has happened in the past 2 weeks, the Taliban were able to take Afghanistan in 9 days instead of the 3 months that was anticipated by many experts, although there were folks who were saying it would fall much quicker. Please see my headlines from last week as to why this is the case, but by and large, it's because as soon as the Trump administration cut a bilateral deal simply with the Taliban that kept the Afghan government out and away from the negotiating table, local Afghan leaders immediately struck deals with the Taliban that they would surrender once American troops withdrew. And that is indeed what happened, which is why Afghanistan fell to the Taliban so quickly. Biden was not anticipating this, was caught flat-footed. The Biden administration, apparently there was a failure of intelligence, but since that time, the evacuation effort has been highly successful. If you look at the fact that we've gotten almost 100,000 people out, and then the estimated number of Afghan people who have helped us and their families in the past 2 decades is at 88,000, you can see that we have gotten most folks out who at least we owed an immediate obligation to withdraw from the region. Now, the question remains, will we now be providing humanitarian visas for example, feminist activists and LGBTQ plus activists and other folks whose lives are in imminent danger from the Taliban? Members of Congress from both the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans alike, are calling for this, and that would be the next step for the Biden administration once we get this immediate, the folks who immediately have visas out of the country. Only 25% of Americans approve of Biden's handling of the withdrawal. I don't know who these 25% are. It's been a dismal failure. It was initially, and even though it's turned around, the question is what could have been done differently? Well, the withdrawal was inevitable unless we wanted to stay and engage in war. The withdrawal was inevitable. It was inevitably going to be messy. It was made more messy by the fact that Donald Trump gave away the farm to the Taliban in 2020 without any concessions in terms of withdrawal that would have allowed this to be less chaotic, without any concessions that would have allowed the Afghan people and the Afghan government in existence in 2020 to have a seat at the table after the withdrawal. But at the end of the day, the Trump administration actually stopped processing many types of visas, and so they slowed the process. And so the Biden administration could have acted much more swiftly, but they had quite a mess on their hands. And it is likely that this chaos would have ensued regardless of who was at the helm. The partisanship around this is really not helpful at this point in time. What does matter is that we got folks out, and we're getting everybody out in time, hopefully without an ISIS-K attack. Looking at our second big headline, Trump is trying to invoke executive privilege to stop the select committee, the House Select Committee, from calling folks who might have things to say that perhaps he doesn't want to see the light of day. But here's the funny thing about that. Executive privilege can only be invoked by a sitting president. That's Joe Biden. Donald Trump cannot invoke executive privilege. This is a form of telling the other branches of government, the judicial branch and the legislative branch, that they cannot have access to things, communications, for example, from the executive branch, in order to protect privacy, in order to protect the sanctity of the presidency, in order to keep information from the other branches of government that might put the country in danger. So Donald Trump has no claim to this. And in fact, Biden will not invoke executive privilege. He's already extended, the ability for members of the Department of Justice and other executive branch officials to speak with the Select Committee. Why? Because the January 6th violent insurrection threatened the very fabric of our democracy. It does not involve questions of protecting the president. These weren't presidential duties. This was a violent insurrection. So no, Joe Biden will not be invoking executive privilege in order to prevent people from testifying and sharing information with this committee. And Donald Trump cannot invoke executive privilege because he's not president. Turning to our third headline, two voters have filed a lawsuit in the California recall, claiming that the recall is unconstitutional. The basis for that claim is that it's two parts on the ballot. You go in, you vote as to whether or not you think Gavin Newsom should keep his position, and then you go to a second part of the ballot, and there are 46 candidates there. Gavin Newsom is not one of those candidates. So here is why it's potentially a constitutional question, because Gavin Newsom could get 49.9% of the vote, and the person running against him on the second part of the ballot could get 20% of the vote, and the person with 20% of the vote would take the office of the governorship over the person who got 49.9%. And legal scholars are arguing that this runs against the idea that the person with the most votes in an election should win that election. So this recall election was set up nearly 100 years ago under Hiram Johnson's leadership. It was a constitutional amendment put into place in order to maintain good government. It is a recall process that is the easiest in the nation, and in fact, this two-part ballot does make it a little unfair. It makes the stakes much higher for the governor, or harder for the governor to keep their position, and easier for someone with not very many votes to get into the governorship. We've seen this enacted one time before with Gray Davis and Arnold Schwarzenegger 20 years ago, and that was again a recall election with a circus of candidates, many of the same one, porn stars, performers, celebrities. And in this particular election, we have 46 candidates, one of whom is the leading Republican candidate. So just quickly on the recall, this lawsuit, if it is successful, it will stop the recall for now. It is unlikely to be successful because this is actually a part of the California Constitution put into place by California voters. So unlikely it will be ruled unconstitutional, but in the advent that it is, then it will mean an immediate stop to the election. And what does that mean in terms of candidates? Well, the leading Republican candidate is Larry Elder. He is a right-wing kind of shock jock guy. Kevin Pothroth is the leading Democratic candidate with far fewer votes, and he is a celebrity influencer. But I want to talk to you about who Larry Elder is. Some things have come to light claims of domestic violence, charges, allegations of drug use. And then Larry Elder's own words, he has said over the years that, quote, Blacks exaggerate the significance of racism, and then suggested that Blacks were mediocre, and claiming racism in the same breath there. He's also said that working mothers aren't, quote, dedicated and available for, quote, all hands on deck commitment to work. He doesn't think the gender wage gap is real. He has said that women are less knowledgeable about economics and politics than men, which makes them more manipulable. He also suggested that women who attended the Women's March, including this woman, were too ugly to be sexually assaulted, as though somehow that's a thing. So he said some highly racist, misogynistic things over the years, and his words are coming back to bite him, essentially, this shock jock. And in fact, his campaign is in such disarray that he recently appointed a new campaign manager 3 weeks out from the recall election. All of this to say, this is the leading Republican candidate to replace Gavin Newsom. And given the ways that the rules are set up, there's actually a pretty good possibility that he could be the next governor of California, even if he elicits just a fraction of the votes he would need in a regular election. Your next big headline: the Supreme Court has reinstated the Remain in Mexico policy for asylum seekers. The Texas Supreme Court ruled that the Biden administration, when they revoked this rule that was put in place by Trump in 2019, that it was done too hastily and it was not done using proper procedures. So it was actually the states of Texas and Missouri that filed suit against the Biden administration to keep the Stay in Mexico policy in place. Why would they file this? Just a quick background on the Stay in Mexico policy. It meant that 70,000 asylum seekers would have to stay in Mexico instead of coming into the United States to be processed. And the states of Texas and Missouri said, look, when asylum seekers come into the country, there's demand on social services. There's a demand, for example, for driver's licenses and for health care, and that it's not fair to put that on the states. So these two states filed suit along those lines. It then went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that the Biden administration would have to reinstate this rule because they didn't withdraw it using proper procedures. So the Biden administration can go back and redo it and withdraw it using quote unquote proper procedures. What's unusual about this is that the Biden administration gets to decide the procedures. And in fact, it's very rare for the courts, especially the Supreme Court, to step in and say anything about immigration policy and a president, because immigration policy is seen as a vital component of foreign policy, which is the purview almost primarily, but almost exclusively of the presidency. So it's very rare for this to happen. So recall, for example, the Muslim ban was upheld by the Supreme Court by and large, even though it was constitutionally questionable and being applied in pretty xenophobic and selective ways by the Trump administration. The Supreme Court, by and large, said, look, this is the purview of the office of the president. So why is the Supreme Court now stepping in on something even more minor with the Biden administration? Well, because they're a supermajority of conservatives on that Supreme Court, a supermajority that was stolen. Recall that members in the Senate refused to even consider Merrick Garland. And so the court actually has one more conservative seat than it should, had the rules been followed. And yes, I will never get over that. I don't care what party or what institutional or ideological affiliation I might have. You don't steal a Supreme Court seat. You don't mess up the rules that hold our very delicate balance of powers in place at the federal level or state level for that matter. So getting back to the Stay in Mexico policy, what does this mean? Well, it means that folks seeking asylum, folks who are fleeing violent gang brutality, who are worried for their safety, who have made their way to the U.S. border, will now have to endure additional traumas staying in squalid encampments in Mexico because they simply don't have the resources to accommodate these asylum seekers. These are encampments that are rife with sexual violence. They're rife with kidnapping. You just go out to get some food for your family and it was commonplace to be kidnapped for ransom for whatever small amount of funds you might have. So this is unconscionable that we are asking asylum seekers to go back and stay in Mexico. And this is where we are. This is what we will likely see with the court moving forward, that will act ideologically and in a partisan fashion using a conservative supermajority anytime a liberal, humanitarian, or democratic policy is coming out of the White House. And last and certainly least, Dodge has announced that it will come out with an electric muscle car. They're calling this eMuscle. And if you have watched Heldman headlines, you know that I've actually been calling for this and begging car manufacturers to come up with an electronic muscle car so that I won't burn in environmental climate change hell for loving my muscle cars, typically driving a Prius, but loving my muscle cars. So Dodge has stepped up and said, yes, we're going to do this. The question, and they're going to come out with a prototype next year, and they'll be on the market in 2024. The question is whether they're going to imbue the Charger or the Challenger with electric capabilities. And I hope that Dodge makes the right decision there, because Chargers are like little toy cars. They're not really muscle cars. So maybe go with the Challenger, go with the actual muscle car. Dodge, make the right decision. You heard here, I'm calling on them to make the right decision and put a little Hellcat or a little Demon out, or an RT or an S, or really scat pack any of the Challengers. One of those Challengers, those beauty, the most beautiful car in existence, put that out electric. That would make my life. As you head out into your day or stay home, please be gentle with yourself, be kind to others, and rock on.